Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jill Weidman, and on behalf of the Tutor Breda Institute, I'd like to welcome you to our Hot Topic event, Securing Critical Infrastructure. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little about the Tutor Breda Institute, our session partner, and our sponsor. The Tutor Breda Institute was created to promote collaboration across public and private sectors with a focus on business, culture, and diversity. We're looking to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering practices with a view to improving and securing business and economies. A core concept of the Institute is our think tank for partnership excellence. The think tank has allowed us to bring together experts and leaders from the public and private sectors and academia from around the world to reshape and develop collaboration and partnering practices while embracing the most critical technology growth. If you're not currently a member of the Institute, we invite you to visit our website to learn more and see how you can participate. I'd like to recognize our partner organization, the Association of U.S. Cyber Forces, for all of their support in helping us to put together this event. The Association of U.S. Cyber Forces is a nonprofit military and veteran service organization that provides the voice for cyber professionals who serve in the military and with other national security agencies, as well as within industry on specific cyber issues impacting national security. AUSCF is an advocate for positive change to policies and programs that better serve our membership and help minimize gaps between the private and public sector cybersecurity efforts. And a special thank you to our sponsor for this event, Gorilla Corporation. Gorilla Corporation is a leading global sales, marketing, and technology channel development company with a focus on serving the technology industry. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the Honorable Lucian Niemeyer, our moderator for this event. Lucian is the CEO and chairman of the board of Building Cybersecurity, a nonprofit focused on enhancing global safety by developing frameworks with stakeholders across multiple sectors to promote cyber protections in operational technologies, controls, and devices for enhanced human security and safety in an increasingly smart world. He is also a member of the Tutor Breda Institute Board of Directors. Lucian?
Hey, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk today about a very important topic. And I want to thank the Institute and the U.S. Cyber Forces Association for their support of this. What should be a fantastic next hour, and I'm really hoping that we'll have some participation from the audience. We'll be taking questions online and monitoring those. And the good news is that although you've heard a lot in the first 3 minutes about nonprofits, we're actually going to talk to 3 individuals who are clearly in the for-profit realm, which is really where everybody should be in cybersecurity right now. I know I'm struggling trying to run a nonprofit and wish every day that I had been on the other side of the fence. But a little bit more about what Building Cybersecurity does. We've realized that there is a need globally to establish a framework that takes existing government standards and private sector standards and translates them into an easy-to-use tiered levels: cyber silver, cyber bronze, cyber gold, cyber platinum, what you need to protect predominantly your assets in a smart world. We understand that as the world becomes smarter in our homes, in our cars, in our buildings, in our cities, we are not necessarily engineering the safety that needs to be incorporated to combat cyber risk and cyber threats. I've spent my background as a former assistant secretary of defense realizing that at any point, a keyboard stroke can be used to threaten people or cause property damage. That's exactly why we created our nonprofit, to come up with a global framework with cyber controls, security controls, to protect those smart technologies everywhere in our society. We don't necessarily want to be less smart. We want to be more smarter, but we need to engineer those safety protections as we adopt more smart technologies, and that is really the sole focus of our nonprofit. If you want to find out more, please contact the website in the top corner. But I'm going to now turn it over to the real experts. I want to introduce for our panel today 3 industry experts that have insight into what is happening right now in the world and where we see potential risk to the critical infrastructure in the United States and around the world. People don't realize that there are ways for cyber attacks to turn off the lights, turn off the water, or cause some other type of an effect that has not existed in the history of the world. Therefore, today more than ever, we must be focusing attention on the efforts of shields up or protecting our critical infrastructure. You've heard that, may have heard that term before. That is the mantra of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within the Department of Homeland Security, the president's arm, leading arm on advocating for policies, advocating for protections in the critical infrastructure in our country. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce three of the panelists today. Then we'll share thoughts. We'll go into some questions at the end, and I'll be monitoring questions from the audience. Hopefully we'll get a good discussion. We do plan to end promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. First, I'd like to introduce Anthem. Anthem is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Herasoft, an enterprise software company providing ransomware proof 100% of the time, perfect data integrity, and for government solutions and private enterprise. Second up is Chuck. Chuck is a regional director for DoD and intelligence community at Dragos. He is also, and this is an incredible twofer here, as a former guardsman myself and member of the military, he's a member of the Army National Guard, where he protects defense critical infrastructure through support in the Mission Assurance Program and policymakers, an office within DoD that I'm keenly aware of. And lastly, but not necessarily least importantly, probably more importantly, Tony is the head of Strategic Partnership and Technical Alliance at Appgate. So I'd like to do is open it up with about 5 to 7 minutes of opening comments of each of our panelists. Then we'll get into a series of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So Tony, why don't you kick us off with an opening comment? You're on mute, bud.
Good morning, Lucian. Good morning, everybody, to the audience and the fellow panel members. Hope everyone is having a great day. Just keep it short. My name is Tony Zernoon, and I do indeed run the Strategic Alliances and Partnerships at Appgate, who is one of the leaders in Zero Trust Network Access. Probably everybody has heard of Zero Trust, so I'll try to keep that to a minimum. But my goal is to do exactly what we started with, which is build the right partnerships and integrations and collaborations to help tackle this, cyber world that we live in. We'll talk about what has come to, but there's a battlefield. We've been fighting it, doing a lot of the same. I'm a mindset that we need to shift that. We'll discuss this a little bit, right? And I've been in cyber for about 25 years. I've been in the trenches from firewalls to patch management and things that were not as sexy, as glamorous. It may be so, but still pretty thankless, right? Nobody comes and rewards us for being secure. They're pretty quick in telling us what happened. So how do we shift that game, right? And now with more things connecting together, Lucian, as you mentioned, our attack surfaces are getting bigger. We still have a major talent gap, skillful talent gap, and we're fighting an asymmetrical war. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, no worries. And we're going to have some hard questions for you, Tony, here in a minute. Hey, Chuck, would you like to go ahead and follow up with some opening comments? I know you guys in Dragos are doing an amazing amount of work working with federal government, particularly in the energy sector. Tell us right now what else you're working on that's important.
Yeah, thanks, Lucian. And thanks everybody for joining. I wake up every day and am just so blessed and privileged to be a part of the team here at Dragos. And really blessed and privileged to be a part of this community of folks that keep the water running and the lights on for both our nation and for the world. There's been a lot of conversations, in a lot of different spaces around transformation, modernization, cloud, zero trust, a lot of different technologies. But you can't do any of it without critical infrastructure. One might almost say that critical infrastructure is critical, right? Think about how many times, from the time we woke up today until right now, we've turned on the lights, we've turned on water, we've maybe made some financial transactions, or right now we're using the internet. All of that requires critical infrastructure to work together, not just one single sector, but multiple sectors of critical infrastructure to work together to make our lives possible. Our adversaries know it. They know that we need power in order to do what we need to do. They know that our citizens of this country need water to be able to have an effective and comfortable daily life. And I think we're going to get a lot of great takeaways. I started out life as an infantryman, a boots on the ground kind of guy sitting in a foxhole. And where we are right now, the things that we need to be focusing on are in the immediacy, right? The 25-meter target, for those of you guys who may have come from a defense background, they're not hard things. They're fundamentals that just require a good perspective on how to eat the elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. And I'll echo kind of Tony's comment. The way that we're going to win this is not by doing it alone. It's not any one individual or any one person that's going to win the fight. It's the community, right? And that community is in the public sector, it's in the private sector, and it's in all of the different organizations and entities that surround and that are within those areas. We've got to work together because at the end of the day, it's not just about water or energy. It's about protecting people's lives and livelihoods. So thanks for letting me be here. And like I said, I'm so blessed to be part of this.
Yeah, no worries. I'm looking forward to being able to share your unique experience with the Guard with the audience. Follow-up questions. Anthem, you're next, bud. Bring us home here.
Thanks, Lucien. And I'm really honored to be on a panel with Tony and Chuck. I'm the newcomer here. I've only been in enterprise cybersecurity for a couple of years. My background is in e-payments, financial services, which is actually the most difficult industry in the world to innovate in because it's more litigious for founders like myself than even being in the military and weapons procurement. So I'm very used to innovating in a very delicate space. And we've been innovating in this newest type of software called public protocols, which is an extension of private protocols that power the internet. And I'm really, really enthusiastic about them because I believe that they hold the keys, metaphorically, to solving our cybersecurity pandemic right now. And I think it's really, really critical that everyone takes what's going on very seriously right now. Everyone recognize that, we are in a very serious state. And, cybersecurity attacks have gone up, many, many times exponentially just over the last, 5-7 years. And they're silent attacks. We don't see them except when things don't go down. And we need to basically structure by integrating parallel type networks. So think new school Christmas lights versus old school Christmas lights that were serial network, right? We need to make everything so if one point breaks, it doesn't cause a choke point. And that's very possible. And we need to work together, as been echoed. So anyway, I'm looking forward to learning more from my fellow panelists and listening in.
Yep. Okay. Also, once again, for those of you who are listening online, we're also opening up the chat line. And anybody, the panelists, want to add anything to the chat while we're getting into our question and answer, that'd be fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and a couple of quick hitting questions here. I think I know the answer to this first one, but maybe the panelists, the audience may not. With my former time in Department of Defense, I've realized we've been engaged in cyber operations for a long while. We've been actively defending the country right now. And with what's happened in the last 3 months, Chuck, I'll start it over with you. I believe, that things are pretty serious, but we're not necessarily seeing things happen around us just yet. Are we in a cyber war from your perspective?
Yeah, so before this panel, I took a look at how RAND defines cyber war, right? And it's actions by a nation state to penetrate another nation's computers or network that to cause an effect, right? To cause damage or disruption. And 100%, we're there. We've been there for years, to be honest. And I know that sounds like a doom and gloom statement, right? And to some extent it is. It's important for us to realize that the threats are real. And unfortunately, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks with the newest iteration of operational technology control system focused malware, the capabilities are real also. However, it's not all doom and gloom, right? We've got the right people in industry right now that are making a difference. And there's some little things that we can do to kind of really move the needle to make us not as attractive targets, right? So Are we in a cyber war? Absolutely. Do we need to be concerned? Absolutely. But is there hope? 100% yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And what I'm seeing is an unprecedented amount of attention paid to by the President of the United States and federal agencies on putting warnings out there on what should we be doing. I mean, just recently, CISA put a warning out, just do basic things like multi-factor authentication, check your remote access points to see if you got a default password. So, but you've never seen those words or the executive orders coming out from the White House like you have recently. So I do believe that there is a lot of effort being paid to it. But it also, you know, Tony, this, you know, gets to the point you made is, you know, how bad is this cyber war? I mean, you know, we've seen an unprecedented level of administration reaction. What's your perspective on what we're facing right now?
Lucian, I think, you know, and I put it in perspective this way. I've heard someone share this. In World War II, at no point, GM factories in Michigan were under any attack by adversaries, the Germans or Japanese, right? Now, fast forward 80 years, and we are in a digitally integrated economy where the technology infrastructure is supporting, you know, the banking, retail, water, energy, and our supplies is within striking distance of a vengeful nation state, or many. In fact, many of them had the cyber army before we did, right? There's 5, you know, we can go down the list, but let me say that they probably were the ones that got hit by Stuxnet the most, right? For those who followed that. Now, what is different about what I think is the cyber war, and how come is it that we don't see it? I guess part of it is like we don't have cyber digital media covering, you know, or seeing pictures of rockets coming in or tanks coming in. We're not seeing it, right? But I can tell you that the CISOs who have been following this, right, and as Chuck mentioned, you know, in the last 2 months, they probably went from a peacetime defending in depth, right? We've been following what we were supposed to do, adding, buying layers of tools, and hopefully hiring and trying to keep the security people at check and doing compliance. That's the day of, you know, a life of a CISO every day, right? Keep rinsing, keep, you know, watering the bamboo, if you will. But what they have done, they have to shift their mindset from a peacetime to the war. All of you guys who've been in military, you know what that means. All your training and everything you've done. Where do people go to become trained for cyber war? Now, in the last 5 years, maybe we do have that kind of training, but most of us, when we get through security, none of us says, what do I want to do tomorrow and get into cybersecurity? That's one problem. How bad it is, I don't know. I mean, we should talk to Viasat. They were just providing communications, you know, in the middle of this whole thing. And they were doing what they were supposed to do, right? A trusted management platform managing 30,000 modems, boom, got owned and no more. They went through it. They have to be right one time. We have to be right 100% of the time. If you just pull back and look at the numbers, for those are number driven, I would say if you look at Gartner and the rest of the people who put, you know, the pricing about what I call the cybersecurity Home Depot aisles, where we go buy these different tools, right? 4,000 plus. I mean, Chuck, you probably know what I'm talking about. Right? And I refer to the consultants as the guys wearing the orange, and hopefully they tell you what you want to look for if you ask the right questions. That aggregate, it's about 200 plus or minus $5 billion, right? I don't know what the latest are, but I would venture to say somewhere on that. It's all of us combined, breathing, dreaming, cybersecurity, selling and buying and doing everything. That's pretty big. Now, if you look at the same numbers reported about the hacker economy, which includes cyber war, right? But to put in perspective for the audience, if you look at the Herjavec numbers and a few other ones that are doing that, we are trailing $6 trillion in hacker economy profitability. That means they're 30x more effective, less bogged down by policies, lack of talent, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, if we continue the same, are we going to find a solution? But I agree with Chuck. The sky is not falling. It maybe it's cracked at some point, but we have to try to build up our resiliency, right? We're going to have to do that. And that only means that we all have to pull together, which is why you and I, Lucian, are part of TBI, and we got attracted to kind of building that partnership. That's how my mindset works. And I think that this has just begun, right? And we haven't lost the battle nor the war. So bring it on.
All right, so $6 trillion worth of potential activity related to cyber bad actors gaining is an unbelievable number worldwide, and I think it's only going to grow. So, Anthony, this question is for you. Is that okay? I mean, we talked a little bit in our pre-session about what's the primary mechanism that cyber actors are gaining or benefiting from 0 days and exploits. And right now, the key word is ransomware attacks. Can you tell us a little more about from your perspective, how ransomware attacks are altering the landscape for just about every company in every sector, from academia to healthcare to critical infrastructure? What is the threat of ransomwares and why is it so prevalent right now?
Yeah, so great question. And the handoff, I would say, happened around 2015. You know, that was when leading groups, Gartner, other groups, clocked in ransomware costs globally around 350 million worldwide. Last year, it was clocked in, I think, around 20 billion. So you're talking, 55x plus increase over a 7-year interval. I mean, that is insane. And really what happened in 2015 is that cryptocurrencies, which are really slang for software keys that access the utility of public protocols, which Bitcoin was the very first one. And effectively, these keys made the banking system out of a monopoly. And the banking system was really putting the lid on cybersecurity. It just wasn't obvious to us for a long time. We had ransomware in the 80s, and this reoccurred again in the 90s, basically, or stopped in the 90s, I should say, because of central bank clearing and eliminating banks being able to clear check to check, for example. When cryptocurrencies came around, this effectively eliminated the ability for central banks to stop any bad actors, kidnappers or system ransomers from being able to collect bounties all of a sudden like they had been. So this opened the door. This is why. And it's exposed a critical infrastructure shortcoming, I'll say, that's existed since the advent of software. And that software is connected in a serial networked manner where there's all of these singular choke points. And we can have certain degrees of redundancy, but if we see the internet today, 30 years in, Amazon, effectively, we rely on Amazon to power the internet. You see the accumulation basically, and we start to see the difficulties. As Tony pointed out, the issue is the attacker can basically compromise as much hardware and software resources as they want without cost, whereas the defender has to pay however much in growing billions, and Amazon has to, billions and billions of dollars of capital expenditures into hardware, as well as software and all the people that employ them. So this is the reason why we have to move to parallel networking. And I'm of the belief that we can integrate. Looking at the history of computing, migrations usually fail because existing software is corruptible. And so that's why, we use Cobalt or, Fortran or these old systems still, because it's not worth migrating because it's too dangerous. Instead, an integration approach, starting to integrate these public protocol, or kind of what the word is now, Web3 layers, basically. And what they are is distributed cloud computing, right? So Amazon, Microsoft, they're central, and it's great. We needed those economies of scale. Now we have even better of economies of scale, but it's only 13 years old. We need to all work together, I think, so we can bring this new innovative speed and technology that's binary better, to infrastructure. So
okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
Yeah, so I want to actually pull a couple of things from what Tony and Anthem both said. Tony, you mentioned resiliency being important, and Anthem, you mentioned kind of redundancy and operations in parallel being important. I think it's absolutely critical that we know how to recover, right? I just spent time on the U.S. national team supporting the Lock Shields NATO cyber exercise over the last couple of weeks, and an adversary is a determined adversary. It's going to happen, right? They're going to figure out somebody, some way, somehow to do what they want to do. We have to be prepared to respond and recover. And in some cases, resiliency is even more important than prevention. If you're resilient, you have an opportunity to actually, get right faster with minimal effect and minimal risk to the revenue generating lines of business than you do if companies just focus on prevention. And I close out this comment by just saying that resiliency can be related to hardware and software, but it can also be in the physical realm. Especially when we're talking critical infrastructure, there's not a lot of spare transformers or other components of the prime power grid just sitting around waiting for something to happen. And so I encourage folks to think about, what are my crown jewels, right? What are the most important assets that are essential to producing, my minimum viable product, if you will, right? And looking at, hey, do we need to have a spare or two, on hand if something were to happen? Does that reduce risk in a way that allows us to do things differently in other aspects from a protection resiliency standpoint?
And I think you guys are starting to move naturally towards, I think we need to get to with the audience, which is not necessarily scaring the bejeebers out of them with where we have risk, but ultimately offering, from your expertise, what the solutions can be. So Anthem, just real quick, stay with me on this one. I mean, Tony mentioned the word compliance. And for me, that's not, how many letters is in that word? It's not a good word because of the fact that, you feel comfortable with compliance when in reality, the cyber threat's evolving so quickly. They need a compliance standard, particularly if it's promulgated by the federal government. It's going to be obsolete by the time it hits the word. And really, what we should be looking at is minimal compliance, but moving beyond that quickly to what we truly need based on our risk assessment. What do we truly need to get to that level of security? You're putting forth technologies like Web3 and other innovative technology to try to allow that recovery that Chuck mentioned to happen so much quicker. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how, when do we move beyond compliance? And I think it should happen today, but more importantly is, how do we quickly assess these new technologies and get them into the solution set sooner rather than later, so we're not just checking off a checklist, but we're truly getting after proactively what we need to do.
Yeah, I think they're awesome questions, and really I think experience counts as the simple answer. In our public protocol Web3 space, we're only a little over 13 years in, and we're really just on the dawn of commercialization of this type of software. I mean, it's like, TCP was before 1990, right? It was there, but it wasn't commercial yet. So that's where we are. We're kind of like in the 80s, I feel like, with these Bitcoin, Ethereum. There's singular layers of software. The history of software shows we have to stack them. I think that we can do very simple things like using these keys can't be forged. So if you remember, like a decade ago, that really famous RSA hack, when all those little key fobs that we used, we couldn't use them anymore because the key minter got hacked at RSA. That isn't possible when we use software keys of Bitcoin, for example, or Ethereum, for example. The key minter is like a big bang. It happened 13 years ago in Bitcoin's case, and you can't redo that big bang experience. And by using these markers, it's like a MAC address or like a serial number that's unforgeable. By tying it into best practices, and simple practices, like one thing you can do today is have just one person be the password administrator of your company, and then ensure there's a certain number of characters and alphanumeric and symbols and numbers that they adhere to in a randomness. I mean, just something as simple as that today you can do, but longer term, I really implore, thinking about how you can really leapfrog where you're at, because you're probably decades behind right now. And this is a war, and maybe this is a wake-up call. And you have the experts on the line here. I mean, these guys have collectively, half a century plus knowledge. So I think it's really an invaluable conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up, and Tony, on that wake-up call here in a minute. But I just want to get back to Chuck, because I think it's something you pulled the thread on. There's little things we can do. Right now there's a lot of agencies out there, particularly 150,000 water systems around the country. They don't have an extra dollar to go ahead and add to cybersecurity. So if you're on a tight budget, Chuck, and you're looking at, okay, what do we go after? What do you think we can do immediately to have a positive impact on your defense posture? And is there a right balance between prevention, detection and recovery before I choke myself to death, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I listened in on a call from one of the top cyber researchers from the Air Force Research Lab, right? Awesome scientist that's done some phenomenal work for the country. And he said something that really resonated with me. He said that every preventative measure that we've come up with has been bypassed. And he's right. If you think about the different techniques the adversaries use and the capabilities and the fact that capabilities are ever changing, that's a true statement. And it's a little bit alarming, right? So I really think that from a focal standpoint, we've got to be able to detect when prevention fails, right? So we have to be able to see our network spaces, particularly the operational technology network space, which has traditionally been underserved, right? And we've got to be able to respond and recover. So if there's I see a lot of organizations when I go out, that have a response plan, but sometimes it hasn't been tested out with all the stakeholders, right? Nobody's walked the full pathway of, well, what happens if I have to replace a part? And how many do I really need to have on hand? And what's the pathway for me to get that part out of my logistics center into, the facility that needs it, right? So being able to see and being able to recover and have a plan that is both tested and, and proven out, I think is incredibly important. And that planning part, that's something that, is a core requirement that you may not require like external resources to do. That's like an internal function that a lot of people could hopefully accomplish with, not so much external, expenditures.
Yeah.
I think another thing that we've got to look at doing is we've got to make the cost of breaching our critical infrastructure higher for adversaries. What do I mean by that? We need to make our architectures defensible. And you'll hear from a lot of folks, and me included, that VLANs are not security, right? VLANs are more, a speed bump, if you will. But it's at least a speed bump, right? So if you have zero budget, you don't have the ability to procure new hardware or re-architect systems right now, you can do some things on the network side of the house that will increase an adversary's cost to maneuver within your space and ultimately make it easier to detect if an adversary is in the network. Those are some things that folks can do time now. You'll also hear multi-factor, just access management in general, huge. Multi-factor is an incredibly powerful tool. Folks have to be aware that there are some limitations of that, right? There are some, especially if we're talking like text message, SMS-based authentication, there's some ways to get around that. So I'd encourage folks to really do research when they are implementing multi-factor. But that's absolutely one thing that can help, like right out of the box, right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, a couple of things also I'll add to that, only because I've seen it firsthand. There's a lot of entities out there that don't even have a checklist. When you get that email that comes into a control center or a SCADA center or something that, hey, that first email that's coming from a bad actor, what do I do in the first minute? What do I do in the first 2 minutes? Do I call my lawyer? Do I call my insurance company? What's my first phone call? I don't think people have even thought of that. So yeah, the tabletop exercises, the desktop that you talked about are critical, as well as just forming for anybody that might be involved with a network or more importantly, a piece of operational technology that can create human harm. What is that immediate reaction? I think some of that's even lacking. So Tony, I gotta hit you up on yours and I discussion about what's happening over in Eastern Europe that may have an impact on us. A couple of things I want to preface it with. First of all, in a discussion last week I had with former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who's also the former CIA director. He famously forecasted a cyber Pearl Harbor, or he was concerned about a cyber Pearl Harbor. And this is back in 2012. He is still concerned that we may not be heeding the warning signs that are out there. Kind of like there were warning signs before 9/11, and that we as a nation, they may not be responding. And we're more a nation that responds by crisis as opposed to true leadership, which I found those comments very compelling, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. You and I were talking about what's going on in Eastern Europe, and we've got non-state actors like Anonymous threatening Russia's space assets, which for me is incredibly dangerous when you're trying to measure your responses as a nation, in this case, the United States, and how we deal with Russia, that you've got other entities that feel like they have the prerogative and the independence to go and independently attack. That's creating an incredibly volatile situation. How do you gauge, with your expertise and what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, how does that portend either a greater or some type of change in the risk to the technologies in our critical infrastructure? You're on mute, bud. I'll do a mute check every time I ask you a question.
Thank you, please do. Third time's the charm. I think you're absolutely right. We have to kind of take a step back and figure out what is different this time versus others, right? If you go back to the days of Stuxnet, right, we spend a lot of time avoiding attribution, right? Just the players were reversed. We had massive threats coming in from, a country with, let's say, unstable leadership that was threatening the livelihood of our lifetimes and interests, and we had to do what we had to be done. But there was no attribution. It took a long time for the people behind Stuxnet to actually be detected, be attributed, and take claim for it, right? If you want to learn more about it, go to Netflix. There's a fantastic propaganda called 0 Days. It tells you everything you wanted to know and don't want to know about it. I love how it was done. There's a hidden message. We're watching, right? Don't mess with us. We're watching. Now, what is different, I guess, is that now, as you can see, there is immediate attribution, right? As I said, during World War II, Pearl Harbor, right, people didn't have to worry about people attacking the manufacturings, by the Germans and Japanese. But what is happening right now is if we are hitting this digitally integrated economy, right, and we're putting the sanctions on Russia, what do you think they're doing? They're coming at and hitting our critical infrastructure, the water supply, the energy grid, the banking system, the decentralized banking system, right? And then, what are those, right? All these public contracts are left open, So that is happening, but the attribution is happening right immediately. China's taking, claim. Russia's taking claim. They're not going to hide the fact that it went over and took over the Viasat modems very clearly, right? And they're going to do more and more, and it's going to happen. We're going to see it more and more. And I think going back to the solution, right, we're talking about, what can we do? First, let's agree that this cyber war, whatever we want to call it, how gloomy you want to make it, right? We all have to understand that we are dealing with an imminent catastrophic threat. It's just called lack of cybersecurity or cyber threat or whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever is better. Just like earthquake, hurricanes, tornadoes, or pandemics that we all went through. We didn't know. What did you do first? We had to get ahead of it. It's information. Where do we fail? Information gathering, understanding, assessing. Dragas, I think that's what you and the team over there, right, Chuck, are doing, is to be able to detect, classify, and assess posture. Isn't that what we did in the pandemic? Take somebody's measurement, see how they are, get the symptoms, check it. There was a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be uncertainty here, but we need to educate ourselves. I think that's first. You have to educate people as best you can. I think they're great. NIST's put great standards out there, right? Their guidance is right. I think is the 800-82, which talks about ICS in particular, security guidance. And we all talked about a couple things. MFA, we talked about remote access, came to the company called AppGate. And what we're trying to do is really change our relationship with how we define our perimeter, right? Going beyond identity, but actually looking at trust. We have to change our relationship with trust. To me, trust is identity plus behavior. And this is why it takes a village to do this right? What we're trying to do is, okay, what can I do today? Because of pandemic, the entire workforce got exploded. Your entire infrastructure got exploded, hybrid cloud, this, that, and everything is now more digitally connected. We are being connected on Zoom, but so our devices and everything is connecting. And eventually, there's networks that talk. There are different protocols, public and private. We have to make sure that we train our users. We understand about these guidances. We have to change our attack surface as much as we can, that whole resiliency, right? I mean, I'll just bring it back to how we live. If I live in Detroit, right, and I have a decent house, I probably have stuff that is my resilience, which is my passport, some cash, stuff that is important to you. You don't leave it on the desk or on the table and then have a party and let people come over. As much as you trust people, you put them in a vault. That's the first thing you do. You buy a vault, make sure it's fireproof, flood-proof, and you put it there. If you could afford a bigger vault, you probably put more stuff in it. But that's what we do. Just because you have that doesn't mean that you just open the doors and, your neighbor comes in, right? So we have to have that kind of relationship with the way we let people access our network, where there are third parties coming in and managing a smart, building or a smart light or cameras, right? They coming in there. We don't just give them a VPN access. Here you go. Come on in and go to every room you want to go. Same relationship with hotels, same with everything we do. We are rationing trust, but we haven't done that because network's been flat. And in OT is a lot more than that, right? Different protocols. So we have to secure those protocols, right? And then also have that change between identity and trust. I think Chuck, you mentioned multi-factor, remove the friction, make it easier for people, but ultimately have the people be part of the solution. We have to get to a point that we can identify. We have to do early detection. I think, Chuck, you alluded to something, previous company I was at, and the military has used this quite a bit. It's called deception, the concept of honeypots, right? Somebody coming there, you need to shift the cost back to the attacker. That's what deception was set to do. There've been kind of a lot of acquisitions, but I think it's a critical thing. It's kind of like an early warning for tornadoes, for earthquakes. To me, deception is that early warning. It's kind of bring you a high fidelity alert. If somebody's interacting with something fake in your network, I can guarantee you two things about them. One, they're either lost because some misconfiguration, they open a door in an airport that they shouldn't have, or they're bad people with bad intention, with a criminal intent about to do bad things. There's no other reason.
Yeah, so I think there is some concern around parts of the community about why we haven't invested in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, right? And I actually see this, unfortunately, too often, and I think about it a lot, right? I started out life again as like an infantry guy, so on the ground, boots on the ground, walking however long we've got to walk to get to where we need to be, right? And occasionally getting lucky to get a ride from a Bradley. And I think back to like what it took to solve a problem there, right? And it was breaking things into their smallest, most manageable part and keeping it as simple as possible. You talked about eliminating friction, right, for users. You talked about, Lucian, you talked about workforce, right? And that there's some challenges there. The reason why we don't invest and the reason why we don't execute on some of these things, I believe, is that sometimes the problem just looks too big. So we've got to break it into something that's manageable, right? And we've got to, step by step, and each step does something little to make a bigger impact. And Tony, you mentioned users a couple of times, man, and you're spot on. Cyber's a people business. It's not a technology versus technology, at least not yet. Right? Maybe in the future, but
Skynet is coming, right?
It's at the end of the day, it's me sitting at my desk against an adversarial counterpart sitting at their desk, trying to outgame each other in this whole fight. And sometimes we forget about the fact that there's other people, right? And that people are not perfect. Sometimes we can use that to our advantage. You mentioned deception. That's another great example of a way to, maybe put some gamemanship into the fight. And I'll kind of close this one out with hitting on protocol security and things like that. Right? There are some protocols and some types of communications that we will never be able to put better security around, just because there's so finite latency considerations, where you're talking about having to make a decision in the span of an electric power cycle, right? We've got to come up with other ways to protect what we can, right? And then those that we can't protect, we need a way to like wrap them in bubble wrap to put it in one term. While also remembering that if we want to get investment in cyber, we've got to be with the business. We've got to show that cyber cannot just be a detriment, it's not a blocker, but that we are the pathway to modernization and additional efficiencies. And so I think that that's an important thing for everybody to realize, that as we're talking about, different types of controls and different technologies and things like that, when you're talking to a board, when you're talking to, a mission owner on my side in the DoD, it's shattering that perception that compliance is going to tell you no, that cyber is going to tell you no, and really bringing a partner to the business.
Yep. Anthony, anything you want to add there?
I learned a lot, I think, and I think that, Chuck, I think brings up a lot of great points in resiliency. And, again, I think of public protocols, Web3, and positive incentive structures where we have these software keys that all of a sudden are biddable and third-party transferable. Yeah, we just talked about the dark cloud of using these keys as ransom, but there's also the silver lining, and I think maybe the sunshine of really that will overpower what Chuck's talking about. Once we commercialize these public protocols, just like we already have private protocols for 30 years powering the internet, I think we're going to see this positive incentive structure take hold, because metadata is dispersed to the local devices with public protocols, as opposed to like an AWS or something, anything central cloud. I look at this like from mainframe to central clouds, and now we're going from central clouds to distributed clouds, or some of you out there might still be on mainframe type system. This might be a leapfrog opportunity for you. And I think one of the great things we look back in history and technology is replete with a lot of success stories with leapfrog technology where the need is so great. And I think that's what we have here. Again, I'm really learning more from the panelists probably than I can teach anyone here. So, I'm grateful. I think that there's a lot that we can help each other with.
All right. So I'm going to follow up on what Chuck said with a shameless plug, with which I'm working on, because you're right. When I was in DoD, it's difficult to get mission owners and CEOs to invest in risk mitigation, because we, by a nation, are risk takers. We'd rather go ahead and spend money to go ahead and grow brand, grow revenue, or expand the mission, give us an initial set of capabilities. And the case needs to be made that, look, we're going nowhere without being able to protect ourselves, particularly in the cyber realm. And from my perspective, you've got to create that incentive. And that's, I think on the commercial side, insurance is that incentive that ultimately, if you're going to either transfer risk, buy down risk, or assume it, you want to, in mitigating risk, you've got to invest. And I think insurance companies will be able to reward you. But the bigger issue here is, okay, we know what we need to do. There are some solutions. How do we get folks to invest in it? It starts in boardrooms. So I don't know if you all know, recently the SEC proposed some rulemaking that would require filings to address cybersecurity. Where you have governance, where you have actually standards in place. And there's a lot of controversy around that right now, to what degree a company can respond to that. I believe it's a step in the right direction, although mandatory reporting, I think, is going to be an issue for this country. As cyber incidents, but I'd like to get you guys' perspective. I won't call anybody out specifically, but how much of a carrot, how much of a stick, what do we really need to do to truly get after tangible results on reducing cyber risk and ensuing cyber protection? What do you think is going to take? My personal answer, government's not the answer. The market can provide it, but how?
So I'll actually talk a little bit about the realities of implementing some of those requirements, right? It's hard to be able to report a cyber incident if you can't tell that it's a cyber incident. So that goes back to like this core conversation about visibility as a key requirement. And if that SEC ruling comes into play, right, and comes into fruition, I think that will actually help, right? That will help drive that as a requirement. In same way, you look at like, insurance companies, taking part in, offering cyber risk insurance. I think that the requirements that come along with those riders, right, from those companies that include things like the basics. You need to be able to see, you need multi-factor. Those also help, push the market in the direction of a more secure, operational stance, if you will. But I think that there's some things that may look like carrots or look like sticks, right? But in reality, they're just, carrots trying to lead people to where we need to be in a, soft and gentle manner in some points. And I'd say, like case in point, the energy sector is a phenomenal, example of how organizations can work with the government to really make sure that what's coming out from a policy standpoint makes sense for them. I'd encourage, all the different nonprofit organizations and, owner operator kind of groups to figure out how to partner with the government to make sure that everything that's coming out makes sense too, right?
Yep. Now, in energy, it's unique because we had SIP standards, we had compliance standards that in some cases utilities are walking away from. There was one utility that chose to take the fine as opposed to complying with SIP because they realized that they're going to spend money on cybersecurity protections that just were counterproductive. So I do reward I believe what NERC has done recently to allow for utilities around the country to come in with more proactive and forward-leaning cyber investments then are rewarded by NERC is probably the way to go. So we are much more responsive and reflexive and adapting to a fast-moving cyber threat. Anybody else want to comment on what we're talking about as far as reward, risk and reward?
I think the good news is going back to the collaboration that we talked about between the government and the public sector. Certain things are changing, which I think are they're a lot of effort in some ways, but they're needed. Think about the supply chain problem that we have, right? Think about everybody's running a GSA contract. They're all third-party, connectors, right? People who connect to us, or they're managing providing something. A lot of attacks have been at the people and processes. It hasn't been at technology. Social engineering, everything out there, every information is there. And they're attacking our people and processes. Ergo, you see a lot of attack in the supply chain. I think, Anthony, you mentioned the stealing of the minting, right? And then that's the anchor of trust. This has happened many times in SSL, in many other ways, right? The DigiCerts and all that kind of stuff. You can watch this is no different than the heist, right? If you look at the most popular Netflix show from Spain, they attack the mint, right? The Casa de Papel, and they may start printing that. So that's your anchor of trust. So I'm saying, it has to change. So good things is happening is, I've shared some of the links I think we can share is, looking at this from an architectural perspective, coming up with a blueprint, as I said, how do we go and change our relationship with the imminent catastrophic threat, which is cyber? Zero trust architecture, right? It's an architecture. There's nothing like a zero trust solution. Don't look for the staples button. No matter how many vendors come out there and say zero trust is zero trust, 150 vendors will tell you, zero trust, trust none, have them verify. But what really is saying is we have to change our relationship. We have to go away from VPNs and NAC solutions that had their days numbered, right? Because our infrastructure have shifted. We can't just take this and then try to exploit more out of them. They can give more. We talk about segmentation of VLAN, but you need to take it to the next level, right? We need to think about who has a need to know access. Trust none, always verify. That's what you need to do. So the zero trust architecture is a blueprint, just like how you look at the blueprint of building a home in San Francisco to be resilient against 3 or 4 Richters of titanic shift versus how you build a home in Florida. It has to be done by design. Thank you, NIST, for putting a guidance around that. And thank you also for, some guidance around 882 that also shared, right? But beyond that, I think is CMMC, which you probably are more, it's kind of that intersection of compliance versus security, kind of building up more of a maturity, right? Anybody who wants to be on a GSA contract has to go back up, kind of like what you mentioned, the bronze, silver, and gold, kind of, you're trying to distill it. I love what you're doing, Lucian, trying to bring it into English. What do I do, right? How do I keep my family home? How do I keep my family? What is it that I need to do to keep my family safe against a pandemic situation? I don't know. None of us knew for 6 months. Mask on, mask off. Do I go? Do I come back? Remove the confusion, man. Just make it simple. So I think CMMC is trying to do that for supply chain. That's a very positive thing. It's bringing capability maturity model and be able to move to a continuous monitoring. fantastic job. The zero trust architecture is amazing. I think this partnerships that is happening, like thank you to our Bright Institute for connecting. Your promise is already delivered. I was supposed to go find someone in Dragus and have a conversation because my federal team says, hey, we need to work with Dragus. I know some of the folks, but now I know exactly who to talk to. So expect my call. And the partnership is real, right? You guys identify what is that device, right? Is it an X-ray system? Is it a PAC system? Is it a PLC controller connecting to this? Is the IP address, whether it's private or public protocols or known, whether it's Modbus or something else that my firewall doesn't understand? I have to make sure this has a need to know access. If it is, I don't know that. I do the zero trust access, but I need to go to Dragus and say, hey, who is this IP address? Does this PAC system need to talk to the nurse's workstation? Probably not. Does the HVAC need to connect to the point of sale? Probably not. Can you create policies that by design, this cannot happen? Well, voila, that is what's happening. It's a positive, is that mind shift needs to happen, is really going back and training how we deal our relationship with the third parties and supply chain. So bring it back to you in this whole little story I told you about, right now, it's really going back and think about how we dealt with the pandemic. And please, let's take a page out of that and the lessons learned, the mistakes that we made. I think we would be much better off using that and training people because they now just lived it. It's just a different kind of virus. It's got to move laterally.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Tony has been unleashed.
I'm going to open up.
One of the best things that came out of that is and I wrote this down. I'm going to use it from now on. Is anybody that's offering a zero trust architecture needs to have a zero trust architecture applied to them, right? So we need a ZTA for the vendors who are offering a ZTA. So I'm not sure you can trust the vendors as much as you can trust their desire for offering you a ZTA. Okay, so we're down to the last 3 minutes. I'm not going to ask Tony because I think we got his closing comments already. But for Chuck and Anthem, is there anything you wanted to add before we close out in this webinar? And you're all both on mute right now. So, Anthem, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So I would just say, remember and just assume that you're already breached. Your system's already breached. I think, to echo what Chuck was saying, resiliency, what is your plan if assuming everything went down? What is your backup? How quickly would it be to get your backup up? Do you have an operating procedure manual in place? Have you asked those questions? What Tony was saying, right? I mean, these are first principle questions. So it's time to take it seriously. Like 10 years ago, now is the time to basically panic about it because, we are at war and there's any time adversaries can flip a switch into all the databases of yours that are already active in mine and all of ours. So, this is the time to act because we like those Netflix movies and those Amazon shipments and all the great things that commerce brings to us, which are all powered by software, which needs to be resilient or else none of that commerce happens. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Yeah. Chuck, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think back, again to my early military days, and when you're standing on the battlefield, you look to your left, you look to your right, and you've got your brothers and your sisters, by your side. And those are the folks that take care of you, right? When things happen, when things are going sideways. And I think the message that we're better together, right? We're better together when we know who we can call for help that's within our community, that's within our industry. Because those are the folks that really understand our processes. They understand our operations. They understand the limitations that we may be underneath from a resource standpoint or from a personality standpoint even, right? We've just got to work as a team. If we are able to work as a team, it makes this entire nation that much more secure and more resilient as well.
Outstanding. I use that as an entree. Chuck, I'll get together about Dragus joining Building Cybersecurity. We could use your expertise. I'll close out this webinar with a couple of things that I'm working on, which is I got some advice from a former Secretary of Defense to stop admiring the problem. We've been talking about cybersecurity threats now for decades. We've got to come up with solutions. We got to get it done fast. And that's, I think, what everyone on this call is dedicated to. We have solutions. Should we be spending money on other priorities? I don't know. I think cybersecurity is probably the most pressing existential threat we face as a world right now. And I'm hoping that we do continue to advocate through TBI and other organizations for increased cybersecurity funding in all boardrooms, and across all sectors. So I'll close it out there. We are 1 p.m., top of the hour. I want to thank our panelists. Looking forward to sharing the stage with you guys again. It's a great group. And I just want to thank TBI and the Cyber Forces Association for allowing us the opportunity to share the stage and share a message for it's been recorded, so for future generations. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a fantastic Tuesday.